Hello everyone. That last tier list video, I kind of grade that as a success of sorts, so I figured I would do another one while I was still sort of thinking about it. I've got ideas for more, but they are going to require me actually going back and playing some of the games in the series that I either don't remember or missed. But I figured I would do a really quick one right now, and that's going to be Ace Combat. Ace Combat, that's Namco's plane action flight sim series that I do like quite a bit. I will say right now I am going to break sort of a rule that I just mentioned. This is not going to be a tier list of every single Ace Combat game, and that is just because I have not played all of them. I have not played the PS1 Ace Combat games. There are a couple portable Ace Combat releases that I have not played either, like the Game Boy Advance game. I just figured I would do the ones that I have played. I also figured it was okay to kind of do that because I don't really think people became super aware of Ace Combat until the PS2 era began. Those first three games, from what I have seen of them, are very different than what would come out later. And it is also worth noting that Ace Combat 3, due to a lack of money to properly localize the game, not only did they just remove the story from the game, they also removed a large quantity of the game's levels. So for me to go and play Ace Combat 3 to try to grade it for this tier list, I don't really think would be fair because the North American version is widely considered to be inferior. So with that out of the way, let's just get right into it. What is our first game? It's Ace Combat 4. Ace Combat 4, Shattered Skies. This was the first one, not actually the first one that I played, but this was the first one released for the PlayStation 2. And I think it's a pretty good game. It is a nice blend of action elements like something out of Star Fox and more realistic, more grounded mechanics where you do really feel like you're in a plane that does have a decent amount of weight to it. You know, you don't have the freedom of movement, you don't have the simplified controls that you might see in a more arcadey game, but there are still a lot of arcadey aspects to Ace Combat that do make it fun and make it fun to replay. Also, we obviously have to talk about the decision, and I know this isn't the first game to do this, but to have a setting that is the real world, but just with fake countries. I don't know, it's creative, it's weird, it's hard to take seriously at times. The story in this game in particular, the background for Aruja, and having this whole thing about the meteor that crippled the economy and stuff, it's creative, I guess. Cutscenes in the game, you know, they didn't have much of a budget for that, you could tell. I honestly don't remember them very well. It was a nice idea to do this, like, story from the perspective of someone who is not actually in the war, but I have sort of mixed feelings about it. This game definitely has its highlights. It has things like Stonehenge, Megalith, some of the other missions and fights against Yellow Squadron and stuff. But I think that this game, it works as a good benchmark, but they would just do a lot more creative and interesting things with the future games. So I'm putting this right here in B tier because it's not necessarily my personal favorite. I didn't grow up with it, but it's the starting point for a lot of great things. So the next game we're talking about then would be Ace Combat 5. This is going right up in S tier. This is my personal favorite. I have mentioned that before. I think Ace Combat 5 is the best Ace Combat game. It is one of those games where it is not, you know, a tremendous leap forward mechanically, I want to say, from Ace Combat 4. Sure, there are a lot more planes. There are a lot of new mechanics, like you being in control of a squadron, new weapons to choose from, certainly a lot of variety in the missions. But it's not a tremendous leap forward. It's very much running on the same engine and all that. I think it's a huge leap forward in most other aspects because there are just so many more missions in this game that, especially back then in the PS2 days, it really was just amazing bang for buck. This is a game that would take a while to get through because there are a few forking paths. You might want to play it multiple times. Nothing amazing. They probably could have done more with that. But it's just kind of amazing how much they decided to go for with this game. And I'll say this, look, I mean, the story in this game, it is very cheesy, but I also think that it's the closest that Ace Combat has come to trying to really do something with the story. I think you could really take this game and you could make it into like a decent 20 episode anime. It has that Gundam feel to it. No disrespect to Gundam, I love Gundam. But there's a certain level of epicness and extreme anime cheese to this game that you wouldn't expect if you just bought this game randomly. You saw the covers has planes on it. You don't anticipate that. You don't anticipate all this weird lore about the country of Yuktobania and Belka and the Rosgrees fairy tale. Like, oh, there's all this weird stuff that, I don't know, I like it a lot. The trailer for this game is super embarrassing, least of all because of the Puddle of Mud song they use, but gosh, I mean, just watch it. It should make you laugh. It just feels like people went way harder than they needed to in most aspects of this game. And that also really applies to the music. Oh man, yeah, really great music, overqualified music. That's something I would say about a lot of these games. The Namco sound team just went really hard with a lot of these soundtracks. I really wish there was an HD re-release or something of this, because it is worth seeking out. If you're just going to play one Ace Combat game, I personally think this is the one to play. So that's why I'm putting it in S tier. And then after that we have Ace Combat 0. This is a prequel to 5. Kind of. I mean, you don't really need to play 5 to understand it at all. I'm putting this in A tier. I think this is similar in a lot of ways. The mechanics are basically the same. They're actually a little stripped back. There aren't quite as many planes. I mean, you have the squad control thing, but you just control one guy. So it's kind of underwhelming. You just have one wingman who you can control. It isn't really that different in a lot of ways from 5. This I would really describe as being very similar in almost every regard. It's set apart mostly by, I would say, two things. You do have a morality system, which it doesn't really do that much, but it is kind of neat that depending on how many targets that can't fight back you want to take out, it does sort of change things later. It doesn't really change the story, it just changes which bosses you fight, but it's neat. It's a neat idea. And also, I think the way that they told the story is also pretty effective. 5, I think, has the best story, mostly because, yeah, it is from the perspective of the characters who you play as. But I do like the documentary style to this. I wish they could go further with it. I know that it would have been hard to do. Honestly, I think it works pretty well. The fact that you have interviews with the people that you fight, and there's like real actors, I don't know, that's really cool. It's weird. You know, it's a risk that you would not expect a game like this to take. So I do like that stuff quite a bit. A lot of the reasons why 5 is good apply to this game. It's just, not as long as 5, not quite as impactful or interesting. But it is also a very nice game. Then we have, the PSP Ace Combat. Ace Combat X. Skies of Deception. It is kind of like a lot of other PSP games in that they were taking a game from the PS1 or the PS2 and just trying to make it fit in a portable setting. And they did a pretty good job of that here. It's not the most amazing game, but it is a decent enough translation of the Ace Combat gameplay onto the PSP. One thing I really like about this game is that this game actually has multiple paths for real, where you have to choose what target, what mission you're going to do next, and based on which ones you do, that will change the missions in the other locations. So if you go somewhere first, the mission later on in an area that you could have gone instead is going to be different. So you do kind of have to weigh what kind of missions you want to do. I wish it could have been integrated into the story more. I just think that's like a really good premise for a military game, to have you really make strategic decisions and stuff like that. And it's a decent way of having the game have more replay value, because it is a PSP game. So that was probably a concern. So I think that was a pretty smart decision. Also, being a PSP game, music's not as good. There's a lot of tracks where you can tell that they just found, I'm not gonna say royalty-free techno loops. They were in the sound library, and they used them to kind of bulk out the music in the game. This game is alright. I mean, I haven't played it in a very long time. And I never played the PSP game that was made after this. I never played Joint Assault, so that's why you're not seeing it on this list. But I like this one. It's alright. But after this we had Ace Combat 6, Fires of Liberation. A lot of these titles, They're really similar. Ace Combat 6, I'm going to put into C tier. And I know that that may be controversial. I really do think a lot of people love this game, and I understand why, because it's a cool Ace Combat game. You have much better graphics than you had before. There's higher fidelity, big maps. I just don't think this one is really all that great. Mostly because I think that the attempts to give it more replay value fall very flat. There's not a lot of variety to the missions in this game. Virtually every mission, with a few exceptions, is just some kind of a ground assault mission. I think it was neat that there are different objectives you can do. The battles are really big. This game is great for having big battles, and you feel the sense of how big they are. And when you're running around, trying to attack specific targets, you do get a great sense of that. And I like it. It doesn't necessarily change things as much as I would like for it to, but it was a good idea. The problem is that when almost every mission is like that, it gets stale really, really fast. And when you replay these missions and try to do different objectives, you realize it doesn't really change anything. So it was a good idea, but it just wasn't really explored that effectively. This game also is shorter than some of the PS2 ones. I think all of the PS2 ones, actually. It's only got about 15 missions, and when so many of them are very similar, it does make it hard for me to want to replay this game all the way through. When you add on to the fact that I don't think the music is quite as good, there are some very standout tracks, but a lot of it is just not as good as 5 or 0's score. And the fact that the story in this game is atrocious. Oh my god. I know Ace Combat is cheesy. I have admitted that. This game is just like cheeseball city. And I think the script is worse. The voice acting is just in some areas much worse, or it's more annoying to me. Oh my god, Shamrock, your wingman. I'm sorry, Sam Riegel. You suck in this game. Please don't take it personally. You're not that bad, but I like to make fun of you. Yeah, just thinking about it now is making me really frustrated. The story, a lot of it is told from the perspective of random civilians, and it just feels totally detached from what you're actually doing in the game. They really only try to connect it at the end as like a Deus Ex Machina. I don't know, it was stupid. I don't like thinking about it right now. I skip the cutscenes, and I try not to skip cutscenes when I replay games. You can just skip all of them. I'm giving you the green light. Don't watch these cutscenes. Just play and shoot some stuff. Not a terrible game. If you are looking for an Xbox 360 game to try out that you've never heard of, it's fine. It does still have that foundation of Ace Combat gameplay, so that's pretty good. And I do like what they were going for with the new system where you can kind of, instead of controlling a squad, you can basically control everybody on the battlefield. It's a nice idea. It's a little too simplistic most of the time, and honestly a little too overpowered in some situations. Yeah, I mean, this game has maybe 5 or so missions that I would definitely replay because they are very fun. I wouldn't want to replay the whole story, even though it is shorter than some of the other games. So this is going in C tier for me personally. So after that, there was kind of a big gap between Ace Combat games, or at least it felt like that to me. This is technically a spin-off. I think most people would not want to count this at all. I will count it because why not? Ace Combat Assault Horizon. This game takes place in the real world. It is basically the Ace Combat attempt of trying to imitate Call of Duty. I don't know. I mean, a lot of people hate this game, and I think that most of that is because the game is very, very repetitive. They basically took dogfighting and turned it into like a QuickTime event. That's really the problem. A lot of the skill that you would have had to use to be good at the other Ace Combat games, to have good dogfighting, is gone now, in service of getting close enough that you can lock on and you're automatically following them, and you just kind of have to follow them for long enough to shoot them with your missiles. And that's basically how you're going to be fighting every single plane. And you fight a lot of planes, because most of this is dogfights. Yeah, very repetitive, but I don't know. I find it fun, in the same way that 6 has a couple missions that I would gladly replay. I think this game has probably just as many. Not to mention that there are some attempts to spice up the gameplay by having you play as an attack helicopter or a bomber, and I actually like those missions quite a bit. I wish that there were more of them. They're very sparingly used across the campaign, but I wish there was more of that, because it's variety in a game that doesn't have that much variety. So yeah, I mean, this game's kind of like a weird experiment for Ace Combat that generally didn't pan out. The plot isn't bad. The plot of this game is at least equal to some of the, Call of Duty or Battlefield games that were coming out, if not slightly better, honestly. but there's not a whole lot that I can say about it. But it turned out all right, and I think that's partially because I think they got Western writers or people with a military background to sort of help do the story this time. So it comes off more grounded, a little more realistic, much less idealistic than Ace Combat, but that is part of the charm of Ace Combat. So I can see why not having it around is kind of unfortunate. Either way, an okay game. Get it on Steam if it's cheap, maybe. But yeah, definitely a game that a lot of people don't like. And I like it more than most people, but I'm willing to put it here in C tier because I understand that it is a departure from what people wanted. Alright, next. Okay, I'll be honest with you. I totally forgot that I ever played this game. Ace Combat Infinity. This is going straight into D tier. Why is it going into the bottom tier? Because you can't play it anymore. This was a free-to-play game. There was a period of time where, for some reason, Namco was turning a lot of their series into free-to-play. So there was a Tekken free-to-play game. There was a Soul Calibur free-to-play game. And there's this, Ace Combat Infinity. Now, you may have heard of that Soul Calibur one. I think it was called Lost Swords or something. That's a very infamously terrible free-to-play game because it was basically just Soul Calibur 5, but reskinned and monetized, from my understanding of it. What makes Ace Combat Infinity different is that it does actually have unique content. It has story missions. It has a plot. I'm not trying to get into conspiracy theory territory, but there is a part of me that feels like this game was changed to be free to play. It was supposed to be a weird mashup of previous Ace Combat games, and then it was turned into what it became. And I'm not really going to comment on the quality of those aspects because it's been a long time and I really didn't play it for that long. So I can't really judge this game as a free-to-play game, as a game with content that you're supposed to be replaying over and over again. I can't judge it on that level. Whatever they were trying to do with this game, it didn't really take off. No pun intended. And you can't even play it anymore because they shut the servers down. So this is just here because this is just a bad idea. There was a potentially interesting game in here. I'm not going to say you can't make an Ace Combat game where the focus is on playing with other people, multiplayer missions, following the Monster Hunter formula or something like that. I'm not going to say that you can't do that. But this was an attempt that obviously did not work for a lot of people. So it's going down here. And that brings us to the most recent game, because after Infinity just kind of came out and nobody cared, there was a big gap, and we finally got an Ace Combat game last year, which I have talked about before. I do like the game quite a bit, as you may know, but I am going to put it in the B tier. I'm going to put it there because it's just not quite as good as something like 0 or 5. I think that the goal for this game was really just to make a new Ace Combat game. And so they kept it kind of simple. It plays more like 4 than some of the more recent ones, where there aren't a lot of frills. You don't control a squad. You don't really make objective or strategic choices during the fight. I wish some of those elements were here, but I understand why they kept it simple. Ultimately, it still works because you've still got great music. You've got plot that is cheesy in a good way. There are some interesting ideas as far as trying to return to the fictional world that all of this stuff takes place in. It's very much like a soft reboot, but it does work. I think it works pretty well. There are some creative ideas. They did new things with the mission. It's not really just a greatest hits. They did have new ideas here, and I do enjoy the game quite a bit. But much like Ace Combat 4, the bedrock for something great to sprout out of, I know it's not a great analogy, that's what I hope with Ace Combat 7. I hope we get Ace Combat 8, Ace Combat 9. I hope they go into really exciting places. That's really all I have to say about it. So that's the tier list. I mean, I know it's not a complete tier list, but did you really care what I thought about the Game Boy Advance game? You really care what I thought about Ace Combat 3? I mean, if you've played them, let me know where you would put them on this tier list. And let me know what you think about these games generally. But until then, I'll see you next time.